Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Apostolos, for the invitation to join you today. I see that I am the only representative of the insurance industry speaking, which is a privileged position to be in, but also poses several challenges. Chief among those is how to overcome the feeling that I may not belong in this forum at all. After all, the programme is predominantly technical and scientific, I see. I, on the other hand, don't have a technical background. Physics and chemistry I dropped as subjects at school at the earliest opportunity, and I only continued with biology because I hoped I might pick up a few tips about reproduction. What could I possibly contribute to a discussion about SOx and NOx, energy efficiency, or what the best BWM system on the market currently is? The honest answer is not very much. But P&I clubs are involved in what I like to call eco-issues. Very much so, in fact. Like ship owners, clubs are being asked to align traditional functions and practices with the increasing drive towards environmental protection and preservation. Clubs are not set up to lead in this area. On the whole, our function as a liability insurer requires us to follow the law and regulation, not push for its reform. The law, in turn, is notoriously slow to advance, or, as we've heard in the earlier session, it moves too quickly with resultant confusion. So in general terms, the clubs represent a reactive rather than proactive force where eco-issues are concerned. However, for the purposes of enhancing environmental awareness, I'll now focus on the primary areas in which eco-issues and P&I do converge. Left one, right, okay. Clubs and the mutual membership we indemnify, service, and to an extent represent, all take increasingly responsible views of the duty to protect the environment. There's no doubt we're all getting greener. Most would say that's because our members are forced by lawmakers and enforcement bodies to be more responsible. To a great extent, they're probably right. But without the stick of financial penalties being brandished at us, we'd all probably not have come this far. That doesn't mean that there is no room for improvement, of course. Clearly there is, but historically the main driving force for reform in business has been commercial interest. For P&I and insurance in general, that translates to claims or premium. Money is undoubtedly the carrot that matters in shipping, and the manner in which success or failure in our business is measured. First and foremost, the clubs provide a vital financial service for the mutual membership, but it's the members who ultimately dictate our interests. I suspect very few discussions on the Acti Miauli in the run-up to the 20th of February renewal centred on how to preserve the ecosystem in the Great Barrier Reef. That said, there can be no doubt that the urge to protect the environment has had an increasing effect on P&I. As mutual entities run principally by ship owners for ship owners, the clubs are required to respond to developments that affect or are likely to affect liabilities. To look at how P&I has become greener, I propose to look at the following areas: salvage, pollution, wreck removal, fines and regulatory infringements, and loss prevention. We don't have too much time to go into detail, but I may have a few minutes later to go into a random selection of current developments that are attracting our interest. The first three of those areas that I've just mentioned fit together to an extent. They've got a direct connection with the environment. Responding to casualties and dealing with their consequences is the main reason P&I came into existence. Decisive and effective casualty response is also vital if we want to preserve our environment. It is, if you like, the club's main eco-issue. Owners and operators of ships experiencing a casualty are ever increasingly bound to ensure that, as well as life and property, of course, the environment is preserved. The more you ignore or fail in that obligation, the greater the punitive compensation claims, statutory penalties, and reputational fallout you will experience. That's the main lesson learned from the big spills such as the Prestige, Erika, and Exxon Valdez, going further back. Recently, though not a shipping case, the Deepwater Horizon has also reinforced that message, of course. After a full-blown casualty like those just referred to, the clubs will, amongst other costs, be asked to pay for the special compensation to salvors for the prevention of pollution. That's not covered by hull and machinery underwriters. Part of the challenge professional salvors voluntarily face is taking steps to prevent pollution, of course. Early salvage awards remunerated them sufficiently, but prevention of pollution is now such a significant head of claim in itself that it's developed into a reward component quite distinct from the preservation of life and property. Scopic now exists to address this. More on Scopic in a moment. The clubs also pay, obviously, for clean-up costs and reasonable compensation claims if there is a spill. And after the casualty, the ship, if it becomes a wreck, the clubs will meet the costs of lighting and marking the hazard, raising or removing the wreck, and facing liabilities that may arise thereafter. The increase of the costs arising in all of these areas have been already well publicised. Looking at Scopic, it's worth having a deeper look at that. Lloyd's formed salvage contracts for professional salvors, or LOF contracts, have existed for over a century. In response to major tanker casualties such as the Torrey Canyon and the Amoco Cadiz, revised forms evolved which refined the original salvage principle of no cure, no pay. The Amoco Cadiz grounding off Brittany in France in 1978 had terrible consequences. After that, LOF 80 incorporated what was known as the safety net provision, which meant that a salvor who had given salvage services to a laden tanker would receive an award, whether successful or not. The purpose of the safety net was to deter salvors assisting a laden tanker from abandoning the salvage when they realized that there would be no cure. The principle was refined further and extended in LOF 90 and 95 contracts. Articles 13 and 14 of the 1989 Salvage Convention were introduced. These combined to develop the safety net principle so that a fair rate payment for the services provided would have to be made. Unfortunately, as is often the case, these provisions led to protracted and expensive litigation as to what constituted a fair rate. The Nagasaki Spirit, a case in 1997 in Japan, reached the ultimate court in England on this issue, which was then the House of Lords. As a result of that, extensive discussion between the International Salvage Union, the property underwriters, that's cargo and hull, and the international group of P&I clubs resulted in a special compensation provision named the Thescopic Clause. That was incorporated into LOF 2000. Thescopic Clause supplements the LOF. The two work together in tandem. But Thescopic only becomes material in the initial salvage award, so if the initial salvage award for this property is less than the Thescopic costs total. Effectively, Thescopic is a daily rate contract added on to the LOF contract. Its purpose is to incentivize salvors to continue providing their services in serious casualties, even if they don't believe the value of the salved property will result in an award that covers their costs. It allows salvors to continue salvage operations solely to prevent damage to the environment. Today, most of the LOFs signed invoke Thescopic, and it's recently been revised so as to update the tariffs it designates for services. It is a continually reviewed process. A quick word about pollution. It's well known that there has, in recent years, been a huge increase in the exposure of ship owners to liability claims in respect of pollution caused by cargoes from their vessels. As with LOF contracts, Torrey Canyon and Amoco Cadiz acted as drivers for the International Pollution Conventions which deal with civil liability, the CLC. Not perhaps driven as much by direct environmental concerns as opposed to the concern to regulate the obligation to pay damages for causing pollution, the CLC has pushed the industry in a greener, perhaps we should be saying bluer, direction. The CLC imposes liabilities for oil pollution. But liabilities are also imposed by domestic statutes such as OPA 90 or by the common law. There are also liabilities assumed voluntarily by ship owners in accordance with schemes such as Stopia. All these liabilities are insured by the clubs, although with a limit in respect of oil pollution claims, which presently stands at $1 billion US, each entered ship, each accident or occurrence. Another crucial eco issue for P&I clubs is fines, penalties. The club rules stipulate that cover is provided for fines in respect of an accidental discharge or escape of oil or other substance or the threat thereof. Just take a note there that the scope of that wording, particularly the expressions escape and other substance, really make that a very broad definition. Potentially, all liquid or gas cargoes and bunkers are included. The rule is somewhat restricted by a series of provisos, the most significant of which is the one that prevents the member from recovering in the event of a MARPOL violation. Equally, if the owner has overloaded his ship deliberately, he will not be able to recover. I couldn't stand up here and talk about eco issues without mentioning loss prevention. It's a mainstay of the club's service offering. It makes commercial sense in that by assisting members to avoid situations that might give rise to loss, claims records are improved. That's the theory. Part of the loss prevention focus is naturally environmental risk avoidance in all its respects. Resources are created to advise, educate, and raise awareness. And to an extent, there's also ship vetting, which can play its part in reducing potential damage to the environment by helping to restrict the number of avoidable casualties, infringements, and incidents generally. Just have a look at a couple of areas that we're currently made aware of. Cold ironing. Got time? Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, okay. This is something I've asked our office in San Francisco whether they've come across any issues with cold ironing, which is taking place in California. They say there's nothing to report on that front, but there is obviously an increase of that activity with Hapag-Lloyd and other liners using that to reduce emissions and their costs as well. There's also environmental compliance. We've heard about that all day today. Polar shipping, thank you for your summary on that, Apostolos. That was very helpful. It's something we've also looked at, and last week the club produced we made a link in our website just to cover that alone. STS transfer is another thing, and you've got the regulations for SOx and so on, where subpoenas have just been served on ship owners for providing documents. Lastly, I just want to leave you with that thought. Is eco ecological or economic? For the clubs, it's certainly an economic issue. Thank you.